on to the last panel. And to introduce our next panel, we'd like to invite Andy Stevenson from Blue Canopy, powered by Jacobs, to the stage to introduce our first government breakout panel session. Andy? I do, right there. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to introduce the panelists and moderator for our final session on defining cyber risk. Michael Dent is the Chief Information Security Officer for Fairfax County, Virginia, where he directs the development and enforcement of countywide information security policies, standards, and procedures. Amy Howland is CSRA's Chief Information Security Officer and is responsible for CSRA's overarching information security compliance and risk management. She has over 20 years of experience supporting the private and public sectors in information assurance and cybersecurity roles. The session's moderator is Robert Carey, who serves as Vice President, Cybersecurity, Cloud, and UC Solutions for General Dynamics Information Technology. He has over 31 years of distinguished service in the Department of Defense, including a tour as DoD's Principal Deputy CIO. Rob?
Well, good afternoon, and so thanks for making some time this afternoon to talk about a subject sort of near and dear to my heart and near and dear to the Pentagon's heart, which is a very simple question, but a very hard answer. And we realize that we're standing between you and a bar probably, so we'll try to go fast, but its subject gets pretty complex. And here's the question. If you bought something and put it in your cybersecurity stack, what'd you get for it? What's the so what? Right? How do you measure the operational value of an investment that you made in your stack? And how do you distinguish its measurements in such a way that you can go to your boss and get the money to do another one, right? And so the panelists and I are going to try to explore a couple of these subjects, and I'm anxious to hear what they think of this subject, because it's hard. There's a lot of products out in the street. They all have features, right? He who has, or she who has the most features tends to do very well. But at the end of the day, if you put it in the stack and you beat it up on a lab environment, it's not necessarily known how well anybody's product would do. So the first question goes back to, we've been performing this risk management approach for our whole lives, right? So 25, 30 years, we've been playing the risk management game. And it seems the bad guys are a step ahead of us, right? No matter what we do, they're better at it. So the risk management approach has been broken down and refined by organizations like NIST, drives what the Pentagon and certainly the rest of the federal government does. The results have not demonstrated a great deal of progress. So the more we apply the compliance framework, we do not seem to get ahead. The tools are more complex. There are more tools out there, but we don't seem to be gaining any traction. And so what I want to ask the panelists here, because these are practitioners, and what do you guys do? What methods do you use to measure how well you're doing? How do you gauge your success in this space? Mike? Let's go down the line.
Well, let me defer to Amy.
Amy?
So I think measuring success, there's so many different ways. And is it your success? Is it your company's success? How well do you sleep at night? That's a good one for me. So obviously, how you measure your success, there's obviously metrics, right? Are you getting attacked or not? Are you turning more green? Are you turning more red? But there's also your corporate success, right? And so one of the things that I think would be a best practice is to have a governance council and involve the business. So your success also has to do with the buy-in from the business. When you're measuring, how many waivers, how many exceptions are you getting? And obviously there's two ways this conversation can go. One is very technical with dashboards and measuring, and the other one is how are you supporting the business and how are you protecting the business? So if you're getting a significant amount of waivers and exception requests for the policies that you've implemented, is it because the end user needs to be trained, or do you need to better evaluate what policies and practices you've imparted on the business? Is what you're doing makes sense? Can your users do their job? So that's one of the ways when you have that buy-in. And then obviously there's your success is how good you feel about what you're doing on a daily basis. If you're not seeing events and incidents, does it make you feel good or does it make you nervous?
And I agree with you, Amy, exactly what you said. We've had this dilemma in the county for years, which we finally have gotten away from, which was we were governing by exception. And of course, getting leadership to understand what those exceptions meant from a risk factor, once they started to comprehend that, those requests went away, because what we started to do now is we've briefed and we've met time and time again with the business, and in Fairfax, it's the agency department head. So they are now ultimately responsible for the data their agencies generate, use, whatever it is for citizen businesses. So now the agency head has to sign off on the exception, which means for them, their budgets will pay for any mitigation we have to do if we, because of that exception, we have an attack or a breach. So when you tell an agency head that in a meeting, they immediately will pull it back. Sometimes they'll go back to their team and they'll figure out, another way to ask it or another way to work with us to make sure we can build compliance and things around those things they're requesting. So to me, it ultimately falls back to leadership in this industry. In government, private industry, it doesn't matter. Leadership has to take their head out of the sand and understand what their data is, understand the classification they need to give it, and then apply security accordingly.
So it sounds like in both of your cases, you have rolled up the network risks management into business or mission risk management, and because that is something you can sort of get your arms around. But is there anything that you do that would drive changes below that to ensure that you're getting the right view at the C-suite level?
For us, it's
what's the connection between the network and the C-suite level?
It's an awareness, and it's briefing risk. It's getting to that board level, that C level. So many times, a lot of my counterparts in government, they don't get that opportunity. I'm very fortunate in Fairfax where I get to brief our board. And I brief them, you stay at a high level. If you get to the weeds with them, they're not going to comprehend it, and their eyes gloss over, and they don't want to hear it. So you have to give them the high level risk status that you have in your environment, and then explain to them what those risks mean and how it can affect the government, and their constituents.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I would say it's very important to engage the business, and you have to have that buy-in from leadership, but obviously it all starts at all the various levels with your network, your operations, your security teams. And basically, when you want to do something new and you want to afford better protections to the business, you have your team that's helping to make those decisions, that's evaluating tools, that's trying to determine how do we tweak this, how do we put this in. When budget comes into play and expense comes into play, especially if it's a high expense, that's where you need the buy-in from your. And so the more that they're aware and the more confident they are in what you're doing, I can say easier sometimes it is to be able to get the budget to implement that. And then when you implement it, you have that awareness across the board. Okay, here's why this is happening. I might have some changes to how I have to conduct my business, what's going to happen on my workstation, et cetera, with my team. But I understand why my company is doing this because we have the communications and we have the buy-in with them.
Well, all right. So shifting gears just a little bit, and I'm going to stay, out of the business realm and into our network realm. In your two professional expert opinions, is there a standard stack, a cybersecurity set of tools or controls? I mean, NIST has a set of controls that they say, hey, you got to have these things. But I don't know that translates to a capability as well as it translates to a checklist and compliance, right? And we all know, and I've said this in public many times, compliance does not equal security. So is there a stack that you guys believe, each of you, that, well, you got to start with at least these things? And you can pick the flavor of any tool that you want. You got to have these things. Is there something like that, Mike?
Well, for me, it's all depending on the business and the solutions and the services you want to provide. I mean, for us, from we are a centralized IT organization, so all all projects, all solutions have to come through our architecture review board. The architecture review board, it consists of all of the lead IT leadership. And then, and lately what's been a very big advantage of that is the directors and agency heads are getting more in tune with what they're providing to their citizens. They're coming to these meetings with the vendors and with their business leaders, and they're figuring it out. And for us, from an enterprise standpoint, we have our standard tool set that we use. You know, you have firewalls, IDSs, you have your secure mail gateways for email, but then what you add on, it all depends on your organization. It's really, that's a hard question for me to answer, and it does depend on the organization.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, and like Mike said, you have all of your, you have to start with your basic stack, right? You have to secure your 7 layers. You have your firewalls, your IDSs, depending on how big you are, how much you want to do, you have your SIMs. But I think the stack, for me, it's constantly evolving and constantly changing. So what your stack was yesterday, I think some of the basic things are going to stay, but you know, your stack needs to constantly change and evolve. So DLP is not a new term. It's been around for years, but it hasn't taken on the prominence and prevalence until, let's say, Mr. Snowden, right, and so on and so forth. And so now, again, depending on what you need to protect, who you are, how big you are, it's not really that size, but you know, you probably want to add DLP to your stack. You want to add insider threat to your stack. But I think there's different ways, Rob, of looking at how you want to define stack. You say stack to anybody, and you'll think exactly what we said, IDS, firewalls. But what about adding your users to your basic stack, right? You have to have trained users with an awareness, because you can buy all the tools in the world and for any amount of money, but if you have a user who holds the door open for somebody without a badge and then leads them to an area where there's passwords with sticky notes, your tools aren't really going to help, right? So I would say you need to add training and awareness and smart users to your stack. And then everybody's, I guess it's good, folks are overusing the term baked on, not bolted in. And I can't believe I said overusing, right? But it's something that we used to be proud of, and now it's starting to become the norm. But it needs to really happen and not just have folks say it, right? If you can have as part of your stack security that's baked into the entire equation, just like Mike was saying, you have your architecture, your review boards, and you have all these folks from the entire organization coming together, and people who are not in security are talking about security, that's your stack.
Okay. So following that, because I like what you said about, hey, the users are really part of the stack, and I buy that, and there's an average set of skills attached to the users. Not everybody is going to be a cybersecurity czarina, but everybody is not going to be adult either, right? There's certain controls that sort of keep that band of training. So what do you think the role of this hygiene, the network hygiene, is in measuring the performance of the stack? Because you can never get that where you want it, right? There's always that problem child. There's always somebody sends something home or does something, you know, that maybe they shouldn't have, and they took a risk and the risk didn't pay off. But what's the role of the hygiene in how well the security apparatus that you guys operate, what's the role of hygiene in that outcome?
I think it's as important as brushing your teeth every day. I think it's basic. It absolutely has to happen. And when you're doing measuring, so again, there's lots of technical things you can measure, like your vulnerabilities, your control status, but you can also measure how many times is the general population or an individual user, how many times have they fallen for a phish? If you have a phishing campaign that you do on a quarterly, monthly basis, how often are your users clicking on things that they shouldn't be clicking? So then that ties back to your awareness campaign, which ties back to basic hygiene.
I look at it as a defense in depth. It's a term that's been around forever. To me, that's the ultimate hygiene tool or stack, if you want to call it something. But if you look at all these latest breaches, I mean, a majority of those could have been stopped by basic cyber hygiene, good basic cyber hygiene, patching your systems. If you don't have a patch management strategy in an enterprise, you're going to lose, because those users are going to click on those links and those things, those vulnerabilities. They're looking for that lack of hygiene. That's what their goal is, and they're successful. and it's sad, but.
Yeah, no, I lived this in the Pentagon, so I attest to everything you guys are saying. So let's move on into another question in the same chain here. How do you guys, so you guys have clearly been operating networks and operating an ecosystem and defending your organization's information. When you bought the last thing you bought and added it to the stack, what was the rationale that you made the decision and you know, did performance of this entity in the stack come into play, or was it features, was it cost, was it a combination thereof? What was your rationale for making the decision?
How do I say this and be politically correct? Stupid users. Clicking on emails. My board, they're not the stupid users. I do not classify them that. Their complaints about marketing emails, spam, spear phishing. So the latest tool we added was a tool that works with protecting DMARC for us. So it's advanced email threat protection. My exchange team is constantly telling me if we add RBL block lists to the secure gateway, citizens aren't going to get to the board members. And my goodness, you cannot have that happen. So my thing is I want to work with the vendor, and I'll give them a cheap plug, and I can. Agari is their name. They're looking at my email stream, at the same time as my gateway, and they're giving a rating to the email coming in based on domain versus sender and all kinds of other things. But my exchange team, their fear of not getting email or a board member complaining that a citizen didn't get to them, they're not applying any of the block lists. So, we're getting attacked thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of times a day. And I'm at the point now where they're like, we'll let the emails come in, but we'll strip the attachments. I don't want the email coming in. I don't need it. I don't need the potential for someone to click on that email if it didn't get caught.
Right.
So.
Okay.
Live and breathe those very same challenges. That wasn't our last one, though, so I will say that I think you take your scenarios, you see what's happening, and you figure out if there's an oh my gosh factor, or how can I better protect something, and then some of it goes back to your vendor's reputation with yourselves, with your team, someone that is tried and true. That's proven on your network. So there's a lot of things, and there's a lot of bells and whistles, and Rob keeps referring to features, and there's a big difference in what it says and what it actually does, and then there's another difference in what it actually does and what it actually does in the exact environment that you are in or you are looking to be in. And so those are a lot of hard discussions that we've had to have recently. There's things that one of our recent things was, what is the best bang for our buck? We have certain things that we're putting certain things in the cloud. We have certain things on site. We have some legacy things that we're trying to deal with. And what can we use that will protect us from all of these different things? We have some policies that we're trying to enact that is sort of in a different realm. But if you're opening files on your machine, and that's going to obviously cause problems in your environment if they're bad files. How can you protect against that? If you have files up in OneDrive, you have files on your machine, you have files from email, legacy files, what is the best thing to do? And from an evaluation perspective, there's really looking at what are your options, how does it work, what kind of discount can I get, and then selling that too. Depending on the price, depending on where you are in your budget cycle, having to sell that. But when you know it here and you can really sell to your leadership when it's outside of your standard budget. For example, it's a new tool you need. You have to be able to explain the risk. You have the risk buy down and the what is it going to do for me factor. So it's not easy. But when you really believe in something, I think, and you have good leadership that can understand that goes a long way.
So let me pull it down for a second. When you say reputation of the vendor, obviously cost, foot stomp on that one, but how do you know? I mean, what's the attributes that are conveyed to you that lets you know you are about to buy down risk, right? I mean, that's really what I'm trying to figure out how to quantify that.
For us, I mean, I love the proof of concept model. I mean, I will look at a vendor's reputation in the market, and not necessarily because all of us have our own quirks and what we like or don't like about a vendor and the solutions they have. But for me, being who we are at Fairfax, I mean, vendors want our business. So I tell them, you know, let us put your software through the system. Let us put it through trials and tribulations and see what we get. And you'd be surprised how much they let us do it. And they actually want to hear the feedback if it's not working. I mean, I can't tell you the number of vendors I told them, you guys need to go back to the drawing board. I mean, if you're not willing to innovate and look at the new technologies that are coming out, if you're sticking with traditional things, traditional antivirus, it doesn't work. I'm telling you now. You need to look at AI. You need to look at machine learning. Those terms you're hearing, they're real and they work. I was one of the first local governments to rip out my antivirus. I put in a new endpoint system, protection system, and here's how I weigh whether it was successful. The old stuff, I was re-imaging 4 to 6 workstations a week, 4 months behind on incidents. Since I implemented this new solution, I've had 0 re-images of workstations. I've had no downtime from a virus or from malware.
Okay.
These latest malware things that have come out, I slept at night. I didn't worry about it. Because anything tries to change on the endpoint, this thing kills it. And these are the things you need to look at. You got to be willing to innovate, make those vendors let you test their systems, and then be honest with them and tell them whether or not it works for you, or if there's anything you think that they can change. You got to work with those vendors.
Okay.
It's partnerships.
Hopefully I'm remembering the question. But I think when you have a suite of tools sometimes, and you know that tool is going to work with the rest of the tools in your environment, that's one of the ways to determine. Really doing that bake-off, doing that research, what you're comfortable with, it really just goes back to what are you trying to do, talking to the vendors and figuring out, getting them to do the proof of concept, to let it really the same things that Mike was saying. I think I'm on board with that.
Okay. So building on what you just said, Mike, you mentioned a couple of attributes, ergo things that you track, right, that helped you determine a success. So I love that you can measure it and you could say, let me just see month to month to month what's changed, and now there's been a financial savings and there's been actually a security risk reduction as a result of that. So are there other things that you two track? Do you guys have scoreboards that you track these attributes of the network against what you're doing and sort of do the month-to-month comparison to see, you know, how I'm doing? Is there a scorecard you guys use?
I don't want to answer, I'll make you forget the question. Because I could go down that road.
Yeah, all right, I'll say all the words and you can agree.
Okay.
So I think, and again, it also depends on the maturity of your company and where you are and what you're building, and I think there's things that you need to track. Yes, so we look at things on, what do we look at on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and as you mature with a particular process or model, you can take some of those daily things, move them to weekly, move them to monthly. So for me, I mean, it's anything from vulnerabilities, how many are there, where are they critical, are they high, what level are they, how fast are they getting remediated, looking at, you determine who's looking at what. Is it your SOC that's looking at certain things? What do they see? What do I see? What do I report to my CIO? What do I report to the board? So there's different levels there. We look at events, and personally, I'm not interested in how many events we have per day. It's kind of interesting to see per month, and as they go up or down, what's the reason for it, and making sure your tools are working or if there's any campaigns going on. But really, it comes down to incidents, and then what the incidents are, how you're tracking those. But, it comes to a point where you have to determine what is just, all this data and information is good to have, but what is the relevance? Because there's certain things that you're tracking. Okay, we had 100 incidents, 100 vulnerabilities last month. This month we have 50. Does that mean you're better protected, or the bad guy's just on vacation? You know, so it's really a little bit hard to tell, but you have to determine what's important to you. And then obviously, as we're looking at our controls, for those who are in the defense contractor space, you've got countdown to 12/31 with DoD NIST 800-171. How many controls do you have implemented? How many POAMs do you have? You know, so I would say that there's a variety of things that are either literally a dashboard or a discussion point at any of those levels of time.
Okay. Okay, Mike?
I agree. You know, well, we've implemented a SIM that, I mean, everything that I can get to report to it goes to it. And we've created a glass table or an executive portal that we're just conditioning the board and the executive leadership to look at. They love the number of events versus the number blocked. They love those numbers. They love the red, yellow, and green lights. And, you know, when they see red, they ask questions. And as long as you don't gloss their eyes over, you know they're getting it. And then for me, it's unfortunate, but I live off of these events, these breaches that have occurred. My board, as soon as they hear it, they're like, are we protected? And if I tell them we are, but this is a potential problem, and here's what we could do to fix that, they'll bring me in and they'll listen a little bit more. So those events, it's unfortunate I live off of the woes of my peers, but it happens. But practicing good cyber hygiene and informing your leadership, to me, you know, having the tools to do it, it's critical, and they get it when they see it.
Do you guys, I just thought of this one, so you're tracking things on a dashboard, you sort of had, like you said, you got red, yellow, green status updates going on. When let's say you added a DLP tool, do you guys measure the impact? Is there a noticeable difference to those things you track? And therefore you can go back to management and say, hey, that was a good thing we just did, because look, I can show you what has changed. Ergo, got better.
You betcha.
You can. I mean, you show an agency head, like a HIPAA-covered agency head, how many times their employees tried to send HIPAA data through an email, and they see that we stopped it. They're elated that it got stopped, but then they're like, okay, well, who did it? And then they get into the weeds of that stuff. That's not my job, but that's so. Okay. DLP, the beauty of that is now you're preventing those things from happening, and you're reporting on them, which, I've seen the agency heads now, they create an extra awareness campaign when they see their employees have a problem. No matter how many times we teach them through the year, somebody's habitually trying to do something against what they're supposed to. So they use that as a tool.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good idea. It's not an I told you, but it's always nice and rewarding when you can say, thank you for helping to make this investment, and let me tell you the number of things that we've found, we've done, we've protected, why we're in a better place. We just implemented XYZ, and you know what? We've just used it 3 times. Yeah. So those are the kind of things that I've found that our leadership likes to hear.
Okay. So last question I have, and I'll get to the audience's questions. So knowing what you know now, and you've had a vast set of experiences, and trying to move into the future and sort of know a little bit more about knowns than unknowns, what would you do differently? If you had a clean slate, what would you do differently as you move into the future of this space of cybersecurity, metrics, performance-based outcomes, known things? I take this action, I expect this output. What would you do differently, if anything?
I would have jumped at the opportunity to be able to get to my board sooner than what I was. I've been there for 15 years. It's only been the last 5 that I've actually been able to get in front of them. So it's been a political battle for me. When I present risk, it was being presented through a chain. By the time that risk got to the leadership who were making those budgetary decisions, it's like that little game you used to play as a kid where you'd pass the secret around the room. By the time it got to the end, it was completely different. So the risk I was reporting wasn't as bad as they thought it was. So then it's like you're spending extra money and extra time trying to mitigate those things. So getting to my board as soon as I could, as soon as I did, was able to, that's been the best thing for me, and I wish I could have done it.
But anything structurally inside your your SOC that you would do differently?
Well,
So I get the management connection, because that's important, once they understand your job and your environment and its impact on providing services to the citizens, right? And
I think being able to innovate, I mean, being able to look at new tools now, I could do it anytime. I don't have to ask for permission to look at a new solution. I mean, it's a given. We're going to be doing that. Our leadership expects us to be doing that because they do not want the breach. They don't want, everything that comes with that, the embarrassment, loss of trust from the citizens. I mean, they want us to stay ahead of it, and we've been fortunate that they help fund that and they help promote that.
okay.
So I think it's money, time, and resources are always going to come up, right? And so you asked more granularly all the way up. I think a few things for me come to mind. One is the ability to make changes very quickly, and having folks on the external teams to cyber, you've got your network teams and your operation teams that are the ones that are making some of these changes that security is requesting. People are busy, and they're tapped and they're stretched, and if I had my druthers, I'd love to just be able to snap my fingers and bam, a change is made. And I'd love for the change to be that simple, right? When you have more complex networks, you can't just push a button or, like they say, flip a switch and make something happen. It's always really complicated. So I guess the easy button would be nice. So I think throughout, from an overarching industry perspective, we've seen a change from a cyber perspective again over the years. Like you were saying, you're just getting to your board. Obviously, there's been a change in how important security is, but there's a lot of positions throughout industry, throughout the government, and cyber leadership positions that are unfilled. And having somebody bridge that gap, you have a lot of workers the doers and the people that make things happen, and you have this department and all these different groups. But if you don't have somebody to help bring people together and make things happen, that's, to me, that's been missing, and so that would be industry change. And the last thing that I think has been, not the last, but the last I'll talk about right now, has been just the awareness. So again, increasing that awareness of cybersecurity. I was at just a general community dinner last weekend, and I was talking to folks at my table that I didn't know, and what do you do, blah, blah, blah. I said, I've been in cybersecurity for over 20 years. And she looked at me and she said, over 20 years? She goes, why are we just hearing about cyber now? And that was a hard one. So I think we've all been aware of it, obviously, but each year it gets, the general public, folks know more and more about it. So I think if, we could do something different just to have as many people as possible be more aware of cybersecurity and awareness and what they need to do in their personal lives and their work lives, and how to be more secure for their home and their company.
Okay, cool. Any questions from the audience? Here's one.
A lot of the discussion was really good. Mostly focused on threat prevention, detection, operations-based vulnerability management, which there are plenty of tools for that. But as far as risk management strategy, most programs and organizations build it on the bedrock of the CIA triad: the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, but fall short under the 9 core security principles. There's actually 9 core security principles. So you have utility, possession, authenticity, authorized use, privacy. And of course, possession is probably the biggest one. All the insider threats that people are talking about is a threat against possession. Possession is 9/10. So DLP, great for that. But again, doesn't keep someone walking out the door with hard copies or media, etc. So again, Snowden, Ms. Winter, and several other cases, breaches, of course, in the NSA, which is their chief goal is for secrecy and security. But again, what would be strategies that would focus on the 9 core principles as opposed to just the old CIA triad?
So you bring up some really good points, and every cybersecurity person's nightmare is our mobile phone, right? You take your phone, you take a picture of whatever's on your screen, and it's the same as walking out the door. But not to be cliche, but there's something that's actually come up that I see a lot, where we literally use the term "see something, say something," and we're trying to purport that even throughout my company, where if you have individuals who are appearing to be having a bad day, who are appearing to be disgruntled, you need to figure out at what level, but report it. And then from a framework perspective, You know, it's interesting is you have all these risk management frameworks that we're doing, but it's really the implementation of it varies. And I think that when you have controls that are asking you to make sure you implement this policy and you're compliant, well, fantastic. What does that get you, right? So you need to go above and beyond. You have to have that basic framework and CIA, and you have to have the controls in place, but you really need to be smart and think about how you're implementing them and what you're doing. So when it says have a policy, great, have that policy, absolutely, but then implement it. Do something about it. And I think that's one of the biggest things that folks do. If you look at some of the frameworks, there's a lot of controls about policies that are a bit frustrating to me. I know from my perspective, we want to be compliant, but then we have to go above and beyond that.
And I agree with everything you said. I mean, I think for us, the policy was the basic foundation. You know, we based our policy off of NIST framework. Mm-hmm. And it works as a policy, but if you can't enforce it, it's worthless. And having leadership buy into a giving, like in my office, we have the ability and the authority to enforce all of our policy. I don't need to go to the CIO or the CTO and ask for permission to invoke something that's going to stop someone that's doing something wrong, to stop a system that's bleeding out or leaking something out. I mean, we have the authority and the ability to do that, and I guess my powers come from the county executive in that sense, in that I can remove an agency head if I have to from a network, you know, depending on what they're doing. We're, you know, the awareness piece of it, I mean, and for the CIA side, it's critical to our employees to know just that basic piece, because we just had a security awareness day last week where it's all for the county employees. It's free to them. It's people from the industry come in and they give presentations, and we don't talk about the policy. We talk about their personal life and their securing themselves, their kids, you know, their online habits, and they bring that back into work. And it's amazing how our incidents go down right after that, and they stay down for quite some time. But then there's, you know, you got to bring awareness back around always and keep it moving. But the guiding principles and the framework we use in this framework, it's worked. And when you can explain it to a leadership and how it works, they get it. And you don't have the pushback. You don't have, the requests we got mostly for exceptions were all because of convenience. They didn't want to follow something. But when you explain the importance of that and you show them, and then when you basically challenge them and say your budget better be able to pay for mitigation of that risk, they get it. And that's unfortunate, but that when you talk money and cents there, that also gets to them. So I hope that answered it.
No, that's good. Any other questions from the audience?
They want to go drink.
Guys, we're gonna buy you back like 8 minutes. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks everybody for coming. This concludes the program, and certainly to the extent that you can reach out to the MVTC, provide any comments, thoughts on ways to improve the program for next year, please do so. We have next year our keynote speaker is the CEO of Palo Alto Networks, so really excited to have him lined up for next year, and hope you'll all come back again next year. Thank you very much. Round of applause for our panel again.